Caroline thought she had the last word. For a few days, it looked like she did. Her followers were loud, headlines were leaning in her favor, and while Jasmine kept her responses measured, people started asking questions. Was there something to the accusation? Was the Congresswoman hiding something? But what Caroline didn't know, what no one outside Jasmine's team knew, was that Jasmine wasn't just defending herself, she was digging, quietly, carefully. And what they found wasn't just some think tank behind a smear. It was a full circle, with Caroline sitting right in the middle of it, connected to donors, digital operatives, and a private PR firm known for planting stories that feel like coincidences. Then came the hearing. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. A committee meeting on funding for justice reform. Jasmine was invited as a guest voice. Nothing flashy, nothing viral, at least not on paper. But someone made a mistake. Caroline was there too. And she wasn't on the panel. She was sitting in the row of guests, wearing confidence like armor, phone in hand, smirking like the segment had never ended. Jasmine didn't react. She took her seat, nodded to the chair, and waited for her turn to speak. When it came, she didn't talk about Caroline. She didn't bring up the TV moment. She went straight into policy, facts, stats, lived stories, from families her bill would support. She kept it sharp but steady, real. The kind of speech that lands because it's not trying to be liked, just understood. Then a hand went up. A congressman asked Jasmine if her non-profit had any current contracts tied to the bill she was pushing. It was worded just for clarification, but the question stung with something more. Carolina didn't speak, but she was watching closely. Jasmine paused, looked across the room, and said calmly, "If you're asking whether I've profited from this bill, the answer is no. And if you'd like to question that under oath, I'll gladly return tomorrow with every filing you want." There was a beat. A few people shifted in their chairs. Then she added, "But if we're going to ask about conflicts of interest, we should probably start with who's funding the people in this room pushing this narrative. Because I have a list, and I'm ready when you are." Silence. That was the shift. Not a shout, not a slam, just a clean public reminder. I see you, I know, and I'm not scared. Caroline didn't move, didn't tweet. The smirk was gone. That clip, it wasn't as flashy as the first one, but it hit harder. People who understood power, real power, watched it and didn't need context. They knew. Jasmine didn't just defend herself. She turned the table without raising her voice, without naming names. Just a simple offer, ask me anything, but be ready for what comes back. And in that moment the game changed, not online, not in the press, in the room, where it actually counts. It didn't end with a press conference. Jasmine never held one. No long thread. No emotional live stream. She let the moment pass her by, because she knew the real work wasn't in the noise. It was in the way people remembered how she handled herself when things got messy. The second clip, the one from the hearing, didn't break the internet, like the first one. But it lasted longer. Reporters quoted it in articles about leadership under pressure. A few high school debate teams pulled it up to show what calm confidence looked like. Commentators stopped calling her emotional and started using words like measured and disciplined. Jasmine never repeated the line. She never had to. Caroline, on the other hand, went quiet. Her usual uploads slowed down. The podcast interviews dried up. A week after the hearing, she tweeted something vague about media manipulation and career politicians, but no one really cared. The moment had moved on, and this time She didn't come out on top. She didn't even come out in control. Back in Jasmine's office, things returned to normal. Her staff stopped checking Twitter every hour. Miles, her comms lead, printed out a quote from the hearing and pinned it above his desk. "I have a list. I'm ready when you are." No fancy frame. Just paper, tape, and a quiet reminder. One afternoon, Jasmine met with a group of students visiting from a local public high school. A girl, maybe 15, raised her hand and asked, "How do you know when to speak up and when to let things slide?" Jasmine smiled, not because it was a light question, but because it was the right one. "If it's about me," she said, "I wait. I don't need to prove anything. But if it's about the people I serve, I speak every time." That was it. No drama. No victory lap. Just clarity. Later that night, as she sat alone in her apartment, Jasmine scrolled through one of the early clips from the panel. The original moment. The tension, the silence, the way she turned her head and said, "That's a lie. Say it under oath." It still hit. Not because it was loud, but because it didn't need to be. She clicked out of it and closed her laptop. The truth had already done its job. And the story, the real one, wasn't about the smear. It wasn't about the scandal. It was about a woman who didn't run, didn't shout, didn't snap back just to be heard. She stood her ground, and in doing that she reminded everyone watching that power doesn't always come from being the loudest in the room. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly when to let silence do the talking. Caroline thought she had the last word, but when she struck back, for a few days it looked like she harder than anyone expected. Her followers were loud. The camera headlines were leaning in her favor. And while Jasmine kept her responses measured, people started asking questions. The air in the studio was heavy, like it something to the accusation coming. Jasmine Crockett sat in her hiding something, straight, eyes locked forward. But what Caroline didn't know, new to pressure, what no one outside, she was a congresswoman from Texas, was that Jasmine wasn't just defending herself when that she was digging. Quietly, this time, carefully, she had chosen silence, and what they until she didn't. Wasn't just some across from her sat Caroline Levitt. It was a full circle, young, with Caroline sitting right in the middle of it, conservative circles, to donors. Caroline had built her name by and a private PR firm known for planting big punches, talking points that lit comment sections on fire. Then came on to the morning panel. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal, maybe a heated debate, a committee about crime meeting on funding for justice reform. What she got was something else. Jasmine was invited as a guest voice. Soft, nothing flashy, Sunday morning chatter about community-based justice programs, but someone made a civil disagreement. Caroline, the host there too, smiled too much, and the lighting wasn't on the panel, and the show was sitting in the row of takes before the next confidence like armor. But Jasmine had come prepared to defend her bill, had never one that shifted federal funding from private. She took her seat, re-entry housing and job programs, and waited. She didn't expect agreement, just respect. When it came, she didn't talk about Caroline cut in. She didn't bring up the TV eyes on Jasmine. How she went straight into policy, non-profit ties, wants to talk about justice stories. Her voice families, didn't raise, her bill would but the support. Knife was there. She kept the studio sharp, got steady, quiet, real. The host, the kind of speech that lands because it's not trying to be liked. Even the camera guy just hesitated understood. On then a hand Jasmine went didn't up. Look shocked. A congressman asked Jasmine, but the way she turned her head, current slow and certain, the bill she made everyone hold their breath. It was worded just for clarification, she said, but say it under oath stung with something more. That was it. Carolina didn't speak, but she was watching closely, not with shouting, paused, not with insults, across the room, just precision, and said calmly, "It wasn't. If you're asking whether I've profited from this bill, the answer is no." Less than 5 minutes later, and if you'd like to question that under oath, I'll gladly return tomorrow with every filing you want. Say it under oath. Hashtag. A few people shifted in their chairs. Leave it. In an
Then
hour,
she added,
it hit 100,000
but if we're going to ask about
views.
conflicts of
Comment
interest,
sections
we should probably
split
start
fast.
with who's
One
funding the
side
people in
claimed
this
Caroline
room
was
pushing this
exposing
narrative.
corruption,
Because
the
I
other
have a
side
list,
saw something
and I'm ready when
else.
you are. A woman who crossed a line on live
That
TV
was the
and
shift,
got
not a
called out
shout,
by someone
not a
who
slam,
wasn't afraid
just
of
a
heat.
clean public reminder.
Producers were scrambling.
I see you, I
That
know,
segment
and
wasn't
I'm not
supposed to
scared.
trend.
It
Caroline
wasn't supposed to
didn't
blow
move,
up, didn't
but it
tweet.
had.
The smirk was gone.
And now
that clip, they were
it wasn't
figuring
as
out
flashy
how
as
to
the
clean
first
it
one,
up,
but it hit
before
harder.
the next
People
segment
who understood
went live,
power,
real
outside,
power,
watched
Jasmine
it
walked
and didn't
out the
need
back entrance
context.
of the studio.
They knew cameras
Jasmine
were
didn't just
already
defend
waiting.
herself. She turned
mic
the table
was shoved
without
in her
raising
face.
her voice.
She
without
didn't
naming
speak.
names,
Not yet.
just a simple offer.
She
Ask
stepped
me
into her
anything,
SUV,
but
shut
be
the door,
ready for
and
what
looked
comes
straight
back.
ahead.
Then, and in that moment,
Call
the game
Terence,
changed.
she said to
not
her aide.
online, not in the press.
We're getting legal involved
in the room.
The title card may not
where
have
it
aired,
actually
but the
counts.
story had already begun.
It didn't end with
This
a press
wasn't
conference.
commentary. It was character
Jasmine
assassination.
never held one.
It didn't take long
No
for
long
things
thread.
to spiral.
No
By
emotional
noon,
live
the clip
stream.
of Jasmine
She let
Crockett
the
shutting
moment
down
pass her
Caroline
by
Levitt
because she
had been
knew the real
reposted by
work
at least
wasn't
a dozen
in the
political
noise.
accounts.
It was in the way
Half
people
were
remembered
praising
how she
Jasmine
handled
for
herself
staying
when things
calm
got
under
messy.
fire.
The
The other
second
half
clip, called
the one
her
from the
cold,
hearing,
evasive,
didn't break the
or
internet,
worse, like the first one.
The original video was
But
only
it
27
lasted
seconds long, but it had become
Reporters
something
quoted
bigger.
it in articles
It wasn't
about
just a
leadership
TV
under
moment
pressure.
anymore.
It
A few
was a
high
lightning
school
rod.
debate teams pulled
Inside
it up
Jasmine's
to show
office,
what calm
things weren't
confidence
quiet
looked
either.
like.
Commentators
Her phone
stopped
was
calling
blowing
her
up.
emotional,
Colleagues
and
were
started
texting,
using words
"You
like
good?"
measured,
in that careful
and
way
disciplined.
people do when they don't know which
Jasmine
side of the
never
line you're
repeated
on.
the line.
Her
She
staff
never
was
had to,
tense, especially Miles.
Caroline,
her communications
on the other hand,
lead went quiet. He stood by the window,
Her usual
tablet in hand,
uploads
reading
slowed down.
headlines out loud
The
like storm
podcast
warnings. Interviews dried up.
Levitt.
A week
accuses
after the
Crockett
hearing,
of
she
corruption
tweeted
on
something
air.
vague about media
Congresswoman
manipulation
dares commentator
and
to
career
repeat it under
politicians,
oath.
but no
Truth
one
or
really
trap?
cared. The moment
But
had moved on,
behind
and this
all the
time
noise,
she didn't come out on top.
something didn't sit
She
right.
didn't even come
The
out
way
in control.
Caroline had delivered that
Back in
line,
Jasmine's office,
like it had
things
been
returned to normal.
Practiced, like someone
Her
had fed
staff
it to her.
stopped checking
Jasmine
Twitter
wasn't
every
new
hour.
to heat.
Miles,
This-
her comms lead,
this felt
printed out a
planned.
quote from the hearing. and
Later
pinned
that
it above
afternoon,
his desk.
Jasmine met privately
I have
with
a
her
list.
long-time
I'm
legal
ready when you
advisor,
are.
Terence.
No fancy
They sat in a
frame.
closed room, just shades
paper,
drawn, tape.
He had
and a
already
quiet
pulled the
reminder.
financial filings of the
One
non-profit
afternoon,
Caroline had mentioned.
Jasmine met with a
There
group
was
of
nothing
students,
shady.
visiting from a local
Everything was on
public high
record,
school.
clean audits,
A girl,
transparent
maybe
donations,
15,
no
raised
missing
her
funds,
hand
no
and
under-the-table
asked,
dealings.
"How do you know when to speak up?"
So
and
what's she
when to let
talking
things
about?
slide?
Jasmine asked.
Jasmine smiled.
Terence was calm,
Not because it was a
flipping through
light
the papers,
question. I
but
don't think
because
she
it was
is.
the right
I think someone else
one.
is. And she's just
If it's
repeating
about
it.
me, she said, I wait.
That was when the real
I
work
don't need to prove
began.
anything.
But if
Jasmine's
it's about the
team
people
started
I serve,
tracing
I speak.
connections every time.
Who had Caroline met
That
with
was
in the
it.
past month?
No
What
drama.
podcasts had she appeared
No
on?
victory
Which
lap.
packs had boosted her
Just
posts lately?
Clarity. One name
Later
kept
that
popping up.
night, as
A
she
think
sat
tank
alone
known
in
for
her
opposition
apartment,
research.
Jasmine
The kind that
scrolled
doesn't
through
just
one of the
debate
early
policy,
clips
but
from
tries
the
to
panel.
dig up personal
The
dirt. Original moment.
At the same time,
The
Caroline was
tension,
riding the
the
wave.
silence.
She
The way she
tweeted,
turned her head.
"If you can't
and
handle
said,
questions about
"That's
your
a
own
lie.
money, maybe don't ask
Say
for the
it under
country's."
oath."
It got
It still
thousands of
hit.
likes.
Not because it
She
was
went on a
loud, but
podcast
because it
2
didn't
days
need
later
to be.
and called
She
Jasmine
clicked out of it
fragile
and closed her laptop.
She said she was just
The
asking
truth
a
had
fair
already done its
question,
job,
but the tone
and
was
the story,
smug, like
the
she
real
thought
one,
she'd already won.
wasn't about the smear.
Jasmine
it
didn't
wasn't
take
about
the
the
bait.
scandal. Not publicly. It was about a woman who didn't
She
run,
stuck to policy,
didn't shout,
did her scheduled
didn't snap,
interviews,
backed
and
just
didn't
to be
mention
heard.
Caroline's
She stood
name
her
once.
ground.
And in
But her
doing that,
staff
she reminded
kept
everyone
watching.
watching
Then they
power
found
doesn't
something
always come from being
a
the
photo
loudest
buried
in
deep
the
in
room.
a social post.
Sometimes
from a
it comes
DC
from
donor
knowing
dinner
exactly
2 weeks earlier.
when to let silence
Caroline,
do the talking, seated next to a man linked to the same think tank feeding opposition research. The caption was harmless, but the timestamp wasn't. The date lined up almost perfectly with when Jasmine's non-profit records were being pulled offline. It wasn't just a smear, it was a setup. And Jasmine knew if she wanted to hit back, she had to be smarter than just firing off tweets. This wasn't about clapping back on camera anymore. This was about proving who was really pulling the strings, quietly, carefully, and at the exact right time, because calling someone a liar on national TV, that was bold. But exposing an entire machine behind them, that was something else.